Welcome back. You're watching HFO-TV.
Welcome back to HFO-TV. I'm Greg Frick, partner at HFO Investment Real Estate. Today we have Ariel Nelson, Government Relations and Communications for the Oregon Housing and Community Service. Thank you for coming. Maybe kind of give us a little rundown on what is the Oregon Housing and Community Services Department and what you do for them.
Sure. So Oregon Housing and Community Services, or OHCS, we're the state's housing finance agency.
Okay.
And we administer both state and federal resources to help with affordable housing development, services like emergency housing assistance, rental assistance. We provide energy bill payment assistance.
Okay.
But we really work in the realm of affordable housing. That's subsidized housing available for low and very low income Oregonians.
So does the federal assistance, for federal assistance to get to somebody living in Bend, does it go to the state first and then you allocate it to the various communities, or does it ever go direct to a city or a city agency?
So that's a great question. There are some forms of federal assistance that will go directly to local communities through the county or city or through the local housing authority. Each region has a housing authority that's funded directly from HUD.
Right.
But then we also have several forms of federal resources, whether it's the federal low-income housing tax credit. You may have heard of the LIHTC program, as it's called, 4% to 9%. We administer those. As well as some other resources from HUD, the Community Development Block Grant, CDBG. Some communities get that directly. We administer some of that as well. That's kind of some infrastructure, that shelter, emergency housing that can pay for basic infrastructure.
What would be the difference of why some communities could get it direct and one would go through the state? Is it just a matter of location or the actual program it's involved in?
It's program specific, but it generally has to do with the size of the city or government, if they have the capacity to administer it and do the kind of reporting that the federal government requires to access the funding. And so for smaller communities, they may go through a larger regional organization or come to us for those resources.
So does that push a lot of your focus on more, smaller communities or rural communities, whereas maybe a larger city has the resources to do the federal reporting and smaller communities do not?
Yeah, it'll depend on what the program is that we're providing. But definitely, but we also have resources that, for example, the city of Portland, will come and apply to us for funds for different things.
Okay, so we're going to talk about a little bit about one of the House bills that passed, and there was a lot of talk in our industry about House Bill 2004, the rent control and things like that. But this is a different one, so we don't need to get into that one. That's a whole other discussion. But kind of maybe give a little background on House Bill 2724, which I think kind of passed without a lot of fanfare in terms of people talking about it, because I think some other rental housing bills were kind of more on the forefront. Maybe give a background of what that is, and we can go in more depth about it.
Sure. So House Bill 2724 is a pretty small program. It establishes just a small pool of funding that's serving as a rent guarantee to help incentivize and motivate landlords to rent to tenants who may face barriers to obtaining a lease, like they may be coming out of the criminal justice system, they have previous evictions, or they don't have credit history. Okay. So folks that especially particularly in this housing market, are having a really hard time as a tenant. And so the bill that passed, it establishes that fund. But in order to access the fund, it ties into some existing programming around the state that a variety of nonprofits offer tenant education courses. Here in Portland, it can be called Rent Well or Ready to Rent in other communities. Right. And these are classes that are offered maybe by a local housing authority, community action agency, or there are a whole host of nonprofits in the Portland metro area that offer this. And it's education like basic budgeting and financing. It's how to be a good tenant, how to do energy conservation, keep those bills down, how to communicate with your landlord, those kinds of things. And so for those organizations that are offering those programs, the idea is that a tenant who successfully completed that program will have a certificate. And then they can take that certificate to a potential landlord and say,
say that I went through this program.
And so on paper, I don't look like your ideal tenant, or I don't pass your credit test, or these things. But for those landlords who really want to help reach those tenants and are willing to take a chance, here's the certificate. And if within the first year of tenancy, you've got red flags, I'm not paying rent on time, I've caused damage to the unit, something like that, you have access to this fund to help you recoup those damages.
Oh, so the landlord
beyond
has
the
access.
security.
So you give a little bit of kind of a guarantee on that tenant for a year.
That's the idea behind the guarantee.
Okay.
And we actually had this fund available in the past at the state, and it for various reasons went away. So this brings back the guarantee fund portion.
Got it.
Tenant education courses have been going on and been really successful around the state.
Right.
But this fund, putting it back at the state and allowing organizations to access that, basically the landlord would go to the organization who gave the certificate and say, okay, I have damages, or I have a problem tenant, help me access the fund. So that's
was this
the way it will
really
work.
put in place because of lack of funding? They lost funding and just a refund? Okay, got it. Okay.
Yeah, just to put that incentive back in there and help give an extra motivation to rent to tenants who need another chance.
And when you say small, how much funding is it?
Yeah, they put, the legislature granted $1.5 million, and a little bit of that goes to some administrative for us to get the money out the door, and also we need to do some reporting back and make sure that the programs that are accessing the funds are meeting the basic requirements of education and that kind of a thing. And we also want to be able to report back to the legislature the successes, or what's going on with this program, which landlords are accessing the fund, where in the state, that kind of a thing.
Is it geographically specific, or is it certain funds are allocated to different geographical parts in the city, or is it just kind of wherever programs are in place and they can continue those?
So we're actually in the process of standing up the program and figuring out the specifics. It's not live just yet, but the plan is to, we have a stakeholder group of the education providers from around the state, and the plan is to have it be accessible statewide.
Got it. And are the education providers more low-income housing providers? Is it nonprofits that do assistance in other fields, and this is just a component of that?
Sure, great question. So it's a variety of providers. It could be a nonprofit, it could be a housing authority, or a community action agency, and these are organizations that also offer other services, other benefits, and help tenants or Oregonians find housing. It's just going to depend where they're located. And that brings up another good point that I forgot to mention. One of the basic elements for a tenant to qualify for this education is they need to be low income as well. So
they do. The tenant does.
Yeah.
So there's an income restriction, or yes,
correct.
Got it.
Yeah.
But they don't have to be in a low income housing
Nope.
No.
This is actually, a lot of our programs at the state are for the low income housing or affordable housing.
Right.
This is really for any tenant going into any unit anywhere in the state.
And so is this up and running now, or is it just in the process of getting?
It's in the process. We're actually setting up the first meeting to gather input from stakeholders. These are folks that currently offer education programs and run those programs. And we just need to do the administrative rulemaking after a bill is passed, a new statute is written. The agency then kind of within the statutory guidelines gets the specifics in rulemaking and develop the program manual so that both the education providers and landlords can access our materials and know what to expect from the program.
And then is there like a part of the funds that communicate to landlords that this service is out there? How do you educate the landlord community that you may have a tenant that doesn't qualify for various reasons, but if they come up with this, as a certificate or completion of a program, this is what you get? Is that on the tenant that has to explain that to the landlord, or where do they get information for something like that?
So part of it's the tenant, and part of their class that they'll take, they have the opportunity to learn how to market themselves as a tenant and communicate their eligibility.
Got it.
But it's also we really will rely on the education providers, the nonprofits and organizations that are offering the classes. Part of their mission and goal is to get Oregonians who face barriers to housing into stable homes.
Right. And
so part of that is they already are doing a lot of outreach with the landlord community and their local community, because rental vacancy is so low, and it's really hard to find units for all income levels in many communities. They're working on that, and that will be, part of the success of their program is helping educate landlords, about renting to all kinds of tenants and finding stable homes for folks.
So do landlords, like the old program, do they have to sign up for this, or is it more on a tenant-by-tenant basis? If a tenant came in and was within the program, that's kind of your initial sign-up?
Yeah, the idea is that the tenant brings this certificate showing that they successfully passed a class.
Okay.
And then, the landlord, that certificate, that's the landlord's connection to the education provider. And so if there are any issues or questions or problems, they can go back to that education provider, to that nonprofit, and go from there, whether they're accessing the fund or, looking for help working with the tenant, that kind of a thing.
And have you guys do a track record on tenants that have gone through the program? And to this, I guess the success rate would be, if somebody that is not able to get stable housing is now, maybe didn't qualify for stable housing because maybe not so much on the income side, but it's more on, things on their record. I mean, what's the track record been in the past in making this program successful?
So in the past, from when the state administered this program, and also we know from our partners that are currently helping place tenants that are graduates of their programs, there's been a very high success rate, and actually the failure rate has been less than 1%.
Wow, that's good.
So that's why we think this small amount of money will be enough to kind of show demonstrate some success statewide, and then hopefully get some more funding to keep it going in years to come. But it's been very successful.
So does any of this money go to the low-income housing providers, or is it really not geared to that group? I mean, if I'm a low-income housing developer and I've already got light tech programs, is it really for that, or is it more for private landlords and owners to encourage them to rent to this segment of the population?
It's probably more for the private landlord market, and really in this market, anywhere that there's a unit available to provide a home to someone, where this is where it's not directing which units, which kind of property that a tenant can access.
Got it. Oh, that's interesting. So other questions I would have would be kind of not so much on the bill, is with what we've seen across the state in terms of immigration, with the economist who was just here. What is Oregon Housing and Community Services looking? How do you address the supply issue, or what's kind of the mandate moving forward in terms of the housing situation we have in Oregon and Portland specific?
So Oregon Housing and Community Services, we're actually in the process of developing a long-term statewide housing plan. And we're actually just engaging now in outreach across the state to meet with not only our traditional affordable housing providers and service providers, but also local communities, local elected leaders, but also cross-sector folks, because we know that the housing crisis is touching every part of our communities, whether you're a teacher and you have students that are homeless in your classroom, or if you're an employer and you can't attract employees because they don't have a place to live in your community. Public safety, a lot of police officers and communities are becoming first responders to people experiencing homelessness. So we're really engaging in these conversations across the state because we've done a pretty deep data analysis of the need, not only rent cost, housing burden, housing cost burden, poverty, looking at building permits. We've, really looking at a wide range of data sources. So we're trying to find out, what data do other folks have locally that we should be including. And so for the plan, we're looking at that data, and then we're also at the same time doing an environmental scan of all of the existing resources for affordable housing across the state and different agencies, seeing what other partners have. So we can then kind of look at those side by side and do a gap analysis of, where's the need, where are our resources meeting that need, or where are they starting to meet that need, where are their gaps, and then, hopefully make get some policy direction from there. Do we need, more resources targeted in this location, or for this demographic, or for this purpose? Do we want to go to the legislature and request, some new programs? So we're really excited. It's going to be kind of like a 5-year strategic look at how we're looking and meeting and addressing the housing need statewide.
And does that work within? So we just had somebody from the city of Portland, city planning. I know they're looking at revamping their zoning for multifamily. Is that something they work with you, or is it because the city's big enough that they're going to handle their own plan, and you're looking at other communities that maybe don't have the financial wherewithal to do a 5-year plan, so to speak? Do you guys work hand in hand with the city of Portland, or is it more hands off with them and you are dealing with other communities?
So when it comes to zoning and planning, we don't have a direct role.
Right.
We work with our partners at the Department of Land Conservation and Development, DLCD. They kind of guide and have overarching state requirements for every local community's planning process, comprehensive plan, and all of that. There are housing requirements in Goal 10 in the land use law where communities are supposed to be planning for and building to meet housing need. in their local community. And so we are definitely exploring our partnership with DLCD, doing a lot of data sharing. We do have our limited role right now is putting a fair housing lens on local plans. It comes through the state, and we look and see, making sure that zoning changes or zoning proposals aren't going to violate fair housing laws. So that's one role that we have. Yeah, so it's just we provide some guidance that way. But it is a conversation that we're having as every community's has such a shortage of available housing, both affordable and market rate. We are really investing in our partnership with DLCD more. We're having a lot of conversations, and it's something that we hear as we go out in communities that is an issue. And we're also looking at other resources for rural communities. As you've mentioned, workforce housing is an issue in a lot of small communities around the state. So we've been partnering under the direction of Governor Brown. We've been partnering with the regional solutions teams across the state, and we've put out an RFI, a request for information from communities on what kind of resources would help them bridge that gap and that housing need in their local
communities. Would that be probably more going in direction like a LIHTC program or something like that within the rural communities to try to spur more development of workforce housing? Or
yeah, so that's why we're doing the request for information to see what kind of tools would probably be the most effective. We do know that LIHTC is more difficult for the smaller communities to access. It's been an easier tool for bigger projects. It's harder to pencil out in the smaller projects that you would see in a small community. So that's why we're looking at whether it's some kind of loan or grants or some, ideally something that would leverage private and public, leverage the private investment as well, and encourage and incentivize private developers to come to the table.
And you guys do both. It's both on the Oregon House. It's both a single for ownership and rental. I mean, you're looking at both when you're looking at the housing issue in Oregon.
That's correct. Yeah. So we do development and rehabilitation of multifamily affordable rental housing, but then we also have several tools and funds and programs for first-time homebuyers, for lower-income homebuyers. We do down payment assistance, funding for homeownership counseling, finance counseling to get ready to purchase your first home, asset building through individual development accounts or IDA. It's a matched 3-to-1 savings program combined with education, allows Oregonians to save for a first home. It can also go towards a car, a small business, education, that kind of a thing. Also on our homeownership side, we offer, we have a low interest Oregon bond loan program, and we actually work with mortgage lenders to access our low interest rates to provide lower interest rate mortgages to first-time home buyers within income requirements.
Interesting. Okay, and that's throughout the whole state.
Throughout the whole state, we have local partners around the state, and it's really about we have a variety of resources, so it's really about kind of combining all of them. You could have, if you're, we have a network of home ownership centers around the state that do counseling and can distribute a lot of the funding I just mentioned, down payment assistance. So it's really about kind of combining these resources.
Interesting. What do you see in is kind of in your studies around the state? I mean, what's been the biggest barrier of affordability within the state of Oregon for? I mean, we've heard about it. I mean, the legislative, that seems like, in our industry, that's all we heard about was stuff going down in Salem about affordability. I mean, what do you see as the barrier of bringing more affordable housing either available to people or making, more people qualify for that? What would you look at policy-wise?
I think that's one of the things we're hoping to learn from the statewide housing plan process. What we're seeing, one of the main things that we're seeing is the federal government has really cut back its investments in housing. And so, when you have someone who is on a limited income, they're on Social Security, or someone that's relying on a Section 8 housing choice voucher, those subsidies aren't keeping up with the rising cost of rent. And so they just simply cannot access market rate housing, and the market is never going to be building housing that's affordable to someone that's at 30% of the median family income or someone who's on Social Security on a fixed income. So that's really where the agency has the most direct role. And
so they're trying to fill that gap then in between?
That's correct. And so with the declining federal resources, all of our resources when we're developing housing require a match with investors and lenders and banks. So it's not there. We don't build anything that's fully, subsidized with state resources. There's this really complex layering that goes on.
Got it.
So it's pretty technical work. But, so we have seen a decline in federal resources. So that's probably one of the biggest challenges for us. However, the state legislature this past session made historic investments for us, both in the emergency housing assistance, homeless assistance part of our work, and then also through the LIFT program, which is the Local Innovation Fast Track Housing Program, $80 million in the form of Article 11Q general obligation bonds, which we had the first round. This is a new form of funding for development of housing. And the first round, there was $40 million in the 2015 legislative session. Those are currently, we made awards last year, and those are currently working on closing and finishing those projects. But it's for
so is that for building affordable housing?
For building affordable housing, and they're able to combine that either with LIHTC or other local investment. And it's targeted at historically underserved communities. So half, and that means half can go to rural communities, which have been historically underserved, as well as communities of color in the urban areas. So, and they demonstrate that through service partnerships. So the first round of LIFT funding, a lot of the projects that were awarded rely on partnerships not only with local nonprofits, but with their local DHS, Department of Human Services offices, to house families with children. Who are accessing services through DHS. Now they have stable homes to access as well. And then the second round is going to be, we're going to be putting out a notice of funding availability for this latest award from the legislature. Again, it was $80 million, so there's going to be the first...
Spread out through the whole state.
Spread out through the whole state. So the first $40 million is going to be, those bonds will be sold in the spring, so we're making the funds available, the applications available this fall. And for the first time, it will be available not only for rental development, but for the development of permanently affordable single-family home
for sale product
ownership
too.
As well.
Interesting. Okay.
So we're working with partners at Habitat for Humanity and Proud Ground on figuring out the model to stand up that funding and have them access that. The key to the LIFT program is because of the form of funding, it's general obligation bonds. In the Constitution for those bonds, there's a requirement that the state have an owner or operational interest in the property or in the land. And so because this is the first time we'll have done home ownership, it's just working out the legal requirements and making sure that we're meeting the requirements for that funding source, but we're pretty excited to be making that available.
Is there any talk about maybe trying to lift that in the Constitution, the ownership component? It just seems like it makes it kind of restrictive in terms of what the state can or can't do in terms of assistance. Like you said, on how do you have an ownership stake on single, on a for sale product versus.
Right. I know that there are some advocates and partners that are interested in potentially exploring that. So we, as the state agency, we wouldn't get involved. That wouldn't take a...
Right, you guys do policy, you just wait and see what comes down the...
Well, we do engage in the legislature, but to get that kind of constitutional change would require a referral to the ballot, and voters would have to approve that because it's actually amending the state constitution. So, you can discuss the policy benefits, pros or cons for changing that, but then there's also the realistic, how do actually getting something like that passed, and it's such a technical piece that there's maybe a challenge there in communicating that to voters, what it is you're trying to accomplish.
Right, what's the benefit of doing it? Yes, interesting, okay. Well, it's good to see the state's dedicating some money. It's just, like you say, we hope it can get out there because, as we all talked about, even our industry, affordability is a huge issue, and, it's with the way, it's kind of what we're talking with the city of Portland, the way things are structured, trying to get affordable units built based on the cost of labor, cost of materials, cost of land, system development charges, it's very tough to bring affordable units into the market. We're not even talking about zoning and things like that about where you're going to put them. So I think it's a big challenge, and it's good the state's working on it. Hopefully we can all come to some solutions and make this thing.
As difficult as the housing crisis is and has been, is affecting every community. The silver lining is that every community and every sector is engaged and cares and really wants to get involved and help be part of the solution. So we're pretty energized by that, and hopeful that everyone coming to the table, that we're going to see some real progress.
Well, thank you for coming. It was very informative.
Thank you.
And we'll see you next time on HFO-TV. Thanks.
Our entire office specializes in multifamily real estate, making HFO the largest multifamily brokerage in the Pacific Northwest. Your success is our passion. Build your legacy with HFO. Call 503-241-5541 or visit our website at hfore.com for more information.